بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه ثم أما بعد. Today, inshallah, we'll talk about the conditions of the prayer, and this will be an exciting topic because we will talk about some exciting conditions. And like I said, I told you that in the email, right, that we may not be able to cover all the conditions because it's such like a complicated, detailed chapter. So we will be probably able to cover 3 of the conditions and leave 3 for next Saturday. And when we come back next Saturday, we'll cover the 3 remaining conditions, and we will cover also the chapter of the etiquettes of walk into the prayer, adab al-mashi ila salah, because it's a smaller chapter. I like to finish one chapter at a time, like in every session one chapter, but this particular chapter, you just can't finish it in one time. So inshallah, we'll finish half of it, and half of it we'll do next Saturday, along with a small chapter of the etiquettes of walk into the prayer, bab adab al-mashi ila salah. And let's see if we can do this, because oftentimes I found myself unable to pace myself, and if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then we can take more sessions to cover what we need to cover. When we say the conditions of the prayer, shurut al-salah, the conditions of the prayer, what conditions are we talking about? Do we have one type of conditions or more than one type of conditions? We have 2 different types of conditions. We have shurut sahha and shurut wujub. We have conditions of validity and conditions of obligation. All of these shurut, for instance, did not include, being Muslim, baligh, aqil, khalin min al-hayd wal-nifas. All of those shurut did not include being Muslim, sane, and baligh, post-pubertal, adult, sane, Muslim, adult. We talked about this. Adult, sane, Muslim, who is not in a state of hayd or nifas, menstruation or postpartum bleeding. Where are those conditions? We need those conditions too. Those conditions are called conditions of obligation, not conditions of validity. If they are not present, the salah is not obligatory to begin with. We don't need to talk about anything because the salah is not obligatory to begin with. So all of these are conditions of obligation. Adult, sane, Muslim, and not in a state of hayd or nifas, all of these are conditions of obligation. But because of the nature of salah, and salah being a timed ibadah, you will add one from these conditions to the conditions of obligation, which is the commencement of time. This one is not only a condition of validity, it is also, and most of the discussion, most of these things, I'll point out the difference between the madhahib when we come to controversial issues, but most of these discussions are universal across the madhahib. So the commencement of time does not only operate as a condition of validity, but it also operates as a condition of obligation. Because the salah is not obligatory to begin with before the time comes in. There is no obligation on you to pray dhuhr if the time of dhuhr did not come in. So out of these 6 conditions, this one is a condition of obligation as well. But what about ritual purity, and what about this no, these are not conditions of obligation. You're required to have those things. You don't wait for them. You're required to basically have ritual purity and remove the impurities and face the qibla and cover the awrah and invoke the intention. Bring the intention to the fore, which is istihdar al-niyya, bringing the intention to the fore, to invoking the intention. Okay, so now we know the difference between conditions of validity and conditions of obligation. Is that clear? And this applies to all the ibadat. And you will find certain conditions across the board, except in very few applications, it is the adult sane Muslim. Sometimes, like zakah, for instance, we have the controversy over zakah, in the money of, children, and so on. But this still does not mean that the children are being addressed. It means that their guardians are being addressed by the obligation of zakah, to get the zakah out of their money. But generally speaking, consider these to be universal conditions of validity: adult sane Muslim, Muslim baligh aqil. These are conditions of obligation. Why do the fuqaha always say Muslim, and then when they talk in usul al-fiqh, they tell you that, the majority tells you that the non-Muslims are also being addressed by the obligations? That's a different story. Because in the dunya, they are not bound by these things. We do not require these things of them. In ahkam al-akhirah, when they go back to Allah, they will be asked, قَالُوا أَلَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ قَالُوا لَمْ نَكُ مِنَ الْمُصَلِّينَ وَلَمْ نَكُ نُطْعِمُ الْمِسْكِينَ. They will say, we were not of the musallin, and we did not used to feed the hungry. But that is an ahkam al-akhirah. It does not apply to the rulings of the dunya. It does not apply to the dunya, and we do not require it of them. Therefore, they sort of considered Islam to be in al-fiqh because they are more practical. Fuqaha are about practicality. We're talking about the dunya here, and we're talking about al-ahkam al-dunya. So Islam is a condition of obligation, even though they are being addressed, according to the majority, by the details of the Sharia. And they will be held accountable for failing to abide by them and comply with the details of Sharia. So these are two different types of shurut or conditions. Conditions of validity, conditions of obligation. Sahha wa wujub. Wujub would be obligation, and sahha would be validity. When we talk about the conditions, the word shart itself, what does a shart mean? A shart means a prerequisite, something that necessitates something who's, okay. So ما يلزم من عدم إلى عدم ولا يلزم من وجوده وجود ولا عدم. Okay, so something whose absence necessitates absence of the ruling, or absence necessitates absence, which is absence of whatever it is, that hinges on it. So I have prerequisites of Salah. The absence of a prerequisite means that the Salah is absent. What is absent here? The validity or the obligation. So the absence of a prerequisite necessitates that whatever hinges on it, whatever is dependent on it, here it is, we're talking about the Salah, will be absent. But the presence of a prerequisite means what? Means nothing. It means nothing. It does not mean that there is Salah, there is a valid Salah, and it does not mean that there is no valid Salah. So if you have ritual purity, did you pray? No, you did not pray. So the presence of the ritual purity does not mean that you prayed, and it does not mean that your Salah, that the Salah is invalid. It just doesn't mean anything. But the absence of ritual purity means your Salah is invalid. Means your Salah is invalid. This definition will not sort out shurut from arkan, the pillars of the prayer. This condition does not differentiate between shurut, the conditions, prerequisites, and arkan, which are the pillars of the prayer. And that, so you will need to add something to this definition of the shart. And that thing that you will add, وهو خارج الماهية, or ما كان خارج الماهية. And it is not part of the ibadah itself, because that will differentiate between the shart and the rukn. Rukn in salah is what? Qiyam, standing, reciting al-Fatiha. Are these conditions of validity or arkan? Why can't you call them conditions of validity? Is the salah valid without standing and without reciting al-Fatiha? No, it's not valid. So why can't we call them conditions of validity? Because they are part of the salah itself. They are, it's like your arm. It's part of you. These are pillars of the salah. There are parts, integral parts of the salah. We call them arkan. Whatever does not belong to the salah is outside of the salah, but still a prerequisite for the validity of salah. Without it, the salah is invalid, just like the arkan. Without it, the salah is invalid. But outside of the salah would be called shurut. All of these things are the limbs of salah, parts of salah, or not. They're not. They're not parts of salah. They are not the limbs of salah. They are not the sujood and ruku' and the Fatiha and so on. So they are outside the salah. Which one did the scholars disagree over being a rukn or shart? The intention. So this one only. So the majority agreed with us. Or we should say we agreed with the majority because we came last. So the majority agreed with the Hanbali view that niyyah is a shart. That is Hanafis and most of the Malikis. Some of the Shafi'is disagreed among themselves, by the way. But the mu'tamad and the madhab is that niyyah is a rukn, and the niyyah is a pillar in the Shafi'i madhab. That is the authorized view in the madhab, even though some of them disagreed. Some of the Malikis sided with them, but the authorized view in the Maliki madhab is the same view of the majority. The majority, which is Hanafi, Maliki, and Hanbali, said what? Niyyah is a shart. And that applies to all of the ibadat. That this agreement is applicable to the majority of ibadat, whether niyyah is a shart or a rukn. And the Shafi'is, or most of the Shafi'is, the authorized view in the Shafi'i madhab is that the niyyah is a rukn. How? Okay, so why do the Shafi'is say the niyyah is a rukn? Because according to the Shafi'is, the niyyah has to accompany the takbirat al-ihram. The niyyah has to accompany, so it is not that you will have the niyyah from before and you will drag it with you, tastasibha. You will keep it, drag it with you. You will have it instigated from before and then you will drag it with you. No, the niyyah has to accompany takbirat al-ihram. So, you will have, when you're making takbirat al-ihram, you are fully cognizant of your niyyah, which is that I'm praying dhuhr, fard, I'm praying 4 rak'ahs dhuhr as a fard, ada'an also, or, in time. So that niyyah that not all of it is a rukn, but this is what is prescribed to be aware of or cognizant of when you make takbirat al-ihram. Or if I'm Shafi'i, then I should do this. So if you say Allahu Akbar, and while you're saying Allah, some of the scholars felt that this caused so much obsession to the practitioners, to the Shafi'i followers, and they tried to loosen this, and they tried to say, no, you could actually have it from before and keep it along. And Ghazali and al-Juwayni are of those scholars, because really to have the niyyah to be fully aware of your niyyah at the time of the takbirah, accompanying the takbirah, may cause some people a little bit of obsession when it comes to the niyyah. And you do see, particularly in predominantly Shafi'i communities, you do see a lot of people hesitate when they make the takbir because they just want to make sure that their niyyah is all there, that they are aware of their niyyah and their niyyah is all there. Anyway, so that's the difference between a condition and a pillar. And the reason why Ibn Qudamah put the niyyah as shart number 6 or the sixth condition is that even in the Hanbali madhab, you want the niyyah to be fresh. When you're making the takbirah, your niyyah is fresh. You want to bring it to the fore, to invoke the niyyah right before you make the takbirah. And you want it to be fresh when you're making the takbirah. So that since it comes right before the beginning of the salah itself, he kept it for last as the 6th condition. The first thing he said, and then some other time we will talk about the other like terms in usul al-fiqh, like that come with a shart usually, like al-mani' al-sabab and so on, the hindrance and the cause and these things. We'll talk about them some other time, inshallah. So Imam Ibn Qudamah here started this chapter of the conditions of the prayer by saying, وَهِيَ سِتَّةٌ, they are 6. أحدها الطهارة من الحدث لقول رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا صلاة لمن أحدث حتى يتوضأ. So you could see the exact wording in Muslim in the footnotes. لا يقبل الله صلاة أحدكم إذا أحدث حتى يتوضأ. So he said the first is ritual purity based on the statement of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No prayer is valid for the one who has ritual impurity until he makes wudu. No prayer is valid for the one who has ritual impurity until he makes wudu. And this hadith was reported by Muslim from Abi Hurairah radiallahu anhu. Do we need to discuss this? This is, straightforward, a group consensus. No need to discuss this. If you don't have wudu, you don't have salah. Unless you cannot have wudu. In the Hanbali madhab, if you cannot have wudu, you make tayammum. And if you cannot make tayammum, you do what? You pray as is. No wudu, no tayammum. Okay. Then he said, الشرط الثاني الوقت ووقت الظهر من زوال الشمس إلى أن يصير ظل كل شيء مثله. The second is the commencement of the time. The time of the noon prayer is from the time the sun reaches its zenith until the time when the length of an object's shadow becomes equal to the length of the object itself. Let us draw the picture that you have in your book. Let's draw it because we will explain why we all disagree. Like, we want to explain why we all disagree about 2 prayers. Not Asr, because this Asr is an established disagreement from before, but mainly Isha and Fajr. Why do we disagree about the time of Isha and Fajr? Why do the calendars disagree concerning the time of Isha and Fajr? So the Shaykh here started by Salat al-Dhuhr. Why did he start by Salat al-Dhuhr? Because when Jibreel came down twice to lead the Prophet ﷺ by the Kaaba, as Tirmidhi reported, the first day he came, he prayed at the beginning of the time, and the second day he came, he prayed at the end of the time, and he said to the Prophet ﷺ, هذا وقت الأنبياء من قبلك. This is your waqt, and هذا وقتك وقت الأنبياء من قبلك. This is your waqt, these are your timings, and not timings for the prophets before you. So the first prayer that he prayed was which prayer? Dhuhr. So every time the scholars talk about the times of prayer, they talk about Dhuhr. Dhuhr to them is the first prayer when it comes to the prayer times. Okay, so we will start from here. That is the Dhuhr. So the sun is perpendicular. We live, where do we live? Where do we live? We live here, you're here. That's you. So, huh? Yeah. So the sun is here, and if the sun is perpendicular on the earth, then this is the time for Dhuhr. So when the sun reaches its zenith, that is the time of Dhuhr. Okay. But how do you define this time? How do you actually figure it out? Figure out that this is the time for Dhuhr. Now, you'll figure it out by your shadow. By your shadow or the shadow of any object. So if you have any object standing like this, no, it's not going to stand, right? So if you have any object, this is an object, you look at the shadow of this object, the sun is now perpendicular. If the sun is perpendicular on earth, there should be no shadow, right? Whatsoever. Zero shadow. But that rarely happens. Happens in the equatorial areas in the summer because the sun is really perpendicular, but there will always be a little tilt. And that tilt causes the shadow to become extremely short, but the shadow never vanishes. There is always a shadow, unless you are in the summer, not in the summer in the equatorial areas, but in the spring or fall in the equatorial areas. Then the sun is completely perpendicular on Earth, and the shadow may completely vanish in this case. But in most areas, in most places, there is this tilt because it's globular in shape. The Earth is globular in shape. So even if the sun is coming like this, there is a little bit of a tilt. Then the shadow becomes short, but it does not completely vanish. So then, when does the time of Dhuhr comes in? When do you know that the time of Dhuhr came in? When the shadow becomes the shortest it could become, and then starts to get longer. Once it starts to get longer, then you know that this is the time of Dhuhr. You know that the sun reached here and started to move away from the zenith, just by like a couple of seconds. The sun moved away from the zenith, because that is how you figure that the time of Dhuhr came in. The shadow starts to get longer after it became became the shortest it could become in the area where you live, or after it vanishes if you live in an equatorial area. Okay, so this is the beginning of the time of Dhuhr. This is when Jibreel prayed the first day, led the Prophet ﷺ in Salat al-Dhuhr the first day. And إِلَىٰ أَنْ يَصِيرَ ظِلُّ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ مِثْلَهُ. The time of the noon prayer is from the time of the sun reaches its zenith until the time when the length of an object's shadow becomes equal to the length of the object itself, because that's the time of Asr. Because time of Asr, according to the Maliki, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis, when the shadow, so this is the stick that we have on the ground here, and this is the shadow of that stick, okay? Now this shadow is equal to the length of the stick. Equal to the length of the stick. What time is this? This is the time of Asr. However, you also need to add the shadow that was present at the time of Dhuhr. Which, so you need to add the shadow that was present at the time of Dhuhr. So this is when time of Asr comes in. When the shadow is equal to the object, in addition to the shadow that was present at the time of Dhuhr. And that is when the time of Asr comes in.
First moment of Dhuhr.
The first moment of Dhuhr. That shadow that was present, which is the shortest shadow throughout the day. The shortest shadows throughout the day, that will be factored in these two prayers. The shortest shadow during the day. Once the shadow of the object is equal to the length of the object plus the shortest shadow that was present during the day, which is the shadow that was present during the time of Dhuhr, then that is the time of Asr. Keep in mind, you think it's boring because you have your iPhone. You know, where we're actually using this, we're mutarakhisin. We were using a rukhsa, a concession, because many of the scholars would require you, even all the not contemporary scholars, and don't obsess about it and don't go out and, you know, every day and look for the sun. But in the past, you know, you really need to rely on yourself. People even discussed whether you could rely on the muazzin. You need to rely on yourself or a report from a trustworthy source. A report from a trustworthy source. And the muazzin is a trustworthy source. But you really needed to rely on yourself to figure out the times of the prayer wherever you are. According to the parameters of the scholars of the past, this iPhone thing would not work. But let me tell you. But we're saying that لا يسع الناس إلا ذلك. You know, that it would be too hard for the people to say otherwise, or to require of the people more than this, to look up their calendar in their iPhones or whatever calendars they have. So this topic, you should really have some understanding of it, because let's say at one point you're camping and you don't have your iPhone handy, or there is no signal or something, then you need to figure this out. So here is the time of Asr. The time of Asr began here. Is there any overlap in the madhab between the time of Dhuhr and time of Asr? No, there is no overlap. It is like as sharp as the sword. So this is the time of Dhuhr, this is the time of Asr. The time of Dhuhr ends exactly when the time of Asr starts. Okay. Now, so the time of Asr, basically we will have this here, and this is the shadow, and okay, here. So okay, this is the shadow. This is the shadow of the stick, and this is the shadow of the stick. So Dhuhr, this is the time of Dhuhr. The sun started to move this way towards the west, okay? The sun reached this point, and now the shadow is equal to the length of the object that we have on the floor or the ground. This is time of Dhuhr according to the Malikis, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis. Time of Dhuhr. The time of Asr. And according to the Hanafis, they will wait until the shadow is twice as long as the object. Until the shadow is twice as long as the object. This becomes the time of Asr for the Hanafis. Okay. We don't have a lot of disagreement over the actual time for Dhuhr and Asr, particularly Dhuhr, because that you don't even, this is not Islamic stuff. This is, anyone can tell you this. The sun reaches zenith. So it is expected. You don't have a lot of disagreement about the time of Maghrib, right? Because it is when the sun dips down and you don't see the sun anymore. So this is the time of al-Maghrib here. So here is the sun. It went down, and now you can't see the sun. You're standing here, you cannot see the sun. And there is no disagreement here either. But, okay, so let's follow this.
Can you say that one more time, please? So the Maliki,
Shafi'i, Hanbali, for them, Asr starts when the shadow of the object is equal to the length of the object. the Hanafis will wait until the shadow of the object is twice as long as the object. It's twice as long as the object. Okay, so then he said, ووقت العصر وهي الوسطى من آخر وقت الظهر إلى أن تصفر الشمس ثم يذهب وقت الاختيار ويبقى وقت الضرورة إلى غروب الشمس. The time of the afternoon prayer, which is Asr, which is the middle prayer, and that is that's an agreement within the Hanbali Madhab, that Asr is the middle prayer that's mentioned in the Quran. حافظوا على الصلاة والصلاة الوسطى وقوموا لله قانتين. So the middle prayer is the Asr. He says the time of the afternoon prayer, Asr, which is the middle prayer, is from the end of the time of Dhuhr until the sun turns yellow. Then the time of preference ends and the time of necessity lasts until sunset. Until sunset. When does the sun turn yellow? Like around here. When the sun is here, the sun loses its shine and turns yellow. Yellow sun. You could say that this is like, people can give you all different kinds of estimations here. What do you suggest? When does the sun turn yellow? How long before Maghrib?
Depends on the season.
It depends on multiple factors, but let's say 1/2 hour, it would be okay. So then, once the sun turns yellow, the time of preference is over. Actually, it is the time of option, not the time of preference, because the time of preference is at the beginning of the time. And then you have waqt al-ikhtiyar, time of option, up until the sun turns yellow. And then you have waqt al-ittirar, the time of necessity. You really could not pray Asr before this, so it's okay until the time of Maghrib. Why do we have these different times? Because obviously, Salah li waqtiha, the Prophet ﷺ said, أحب الأعمال إلى الله صلاة لوقتها. The best deed before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Salah, on time, upon the commencement of the time. And that applies to all prayers except for certain cases. Dhuhr and Isha, Dhuhr in certain cases, and Isha. But the other prayers, they need to be prayed. It's preferable to be prayed on time. But why did he say that the time of option ends by the sun becoming yellow? Because we have a certain group of ahadith that we work with in terms of the times of the salah. One of the most important hadiths is this hadith that is reported by Tirmidhi and others as well, where Jibreel prayed with the Prophet ﷺ 2 days, and he told you the time is between these two times. The first day, Jibreel was told to pray when the shadow became as long as the object itself. The second day, Jibreel prayed when the sun became yellow. Prayed with the Prophet ﷺ when the sun became yellow. And he said that the time for you and your ummah is between these two, first day and the second day. But we have a hadith from the Prophet ﷺ where he said, من أدرك ركعة من العصر قبل أن تغرب الشمس فقد أدرك العصر. Hadith ibn Umar. Whoever catches one rak'ah of al-Asr before the sun sets, he would have caught al-Asr. So this hadith tells us that Asr time extends all the way to al-Maghrib. But the hadith of Tirmidhi tells us what? That you should not really defer it beyond this time. Once the sun becomes yellow, that this is makruh to defer Asr until the sun becomes yellow. It is really makruh. And the closer it comes to sunset, it becomes more and more makruh to defer al-Asr. Is that clear? So the time of Asr, according to the majority, begins when the stick reaches, when the shadow reaches the length of the object. The time of the option to pray, or the time, you could just loosely say the time of preference is until the sun becomes yellow. The time of necessity ends when the sun sets, when the time of Maghrib starts. In masajid where you have mixed community of Hanafis and Shafi'is, just pray Asr the Hanafi time. I mean, because if you sit down and you argue and debate the issue itself and who's right and who's wrong, that is really not conducive to much harmony in such communities. If you pray it at this time, you should be fine according to everybody. Like your Asr will be mujzi', your Asr will be valid according to everybody. If the Hanafi members of your masjid are flexible enough and it's not such a big deal for them, they would be okay and they would tolerate the position of the majority, then you pray Asr here because that's the preferred time for us to pray it on time, to pray it early. So this is preferred. But if you have members of your community that would feel sinful if they followed that position and they feel that we're praying Asr before the Asr time, then for the comfort of those members, keep al-Asr at the Hanafi time so that everybody feels okay and comfortable about their Asr. That easy?
Would you advise?
We could actually mitigate much of our differences this way. It's not a big deal.
Would you advise a person who's following the Hanafi method not to pray Dhuhr in between those two times? Like the time where Dhuhr...
And many Hanafi scholars do this out of wara, because the majority of the scholars consider this to be the beginning of the time of Asr. So they do advise their followers to pray Dhuhr before this time. Oh, yeah. Then,
what evidence is used by the Hanafi madhab to say that the Asr time begins when the shadow is 2 times? Why is this based on qiyas?
no, it is based on reports that the Ahl al-Hadith considered weak. But, then you should just go back and read the Hanafi rebuttal of this. Anyway, moving right along. The Maghrib time, yes.
What is the preferred end time?
Hmm?
Preference, I mean, what time is
For the Dhuhr, he will mention this or not? Oh, he doesn't mention this. Okay, so the time of Dhuhr, okay, so every Salah li waqtiha means the Salah on time. So when the time comes in, you need to pray. That is the default, because the Prophet ﷺ was asked about the best deeds before Allah, habbul a'mali ila Allah, most beloved deeds to Allah, and he said the Salah li waqtiha. Okay, so in certain salawat there is an exception. In Salat al-Dhuhr, there is an exception when it is too hot, fil hajira. If it is too hot, then the Prophet ﷺ said, أبردوا بالظهر في شدة الحر فإن شدة الحر من فيح جهنم. Meaning defer Dhuhr until it cools down if it is too hot, because heat is from فيح جهنم, is from the transmitted heat of Jahannam or something. So the abridu bil-dhuhr, meaning the first dhuhr until it cools down, fi shiddat al-har, if it is too hot. That is an exception that is agreed upon by the scholars. That if it is too hot, then you defer the dhuhr until it calms down, preferably. If you pray it on time, your prayer is valid, but preferably you defer. Why is this? Because you want to be together when you're praying. You do not want to be like frustrated with the heat and just you want it to be in the best condition that you could be in when you start your prayer. That's why you should not pray if you're hungry, and you should not until you eat, and you should not pray if you need to use the bathroom until you use the bathroom, to get yourself to be in the best condition during your prayer. So that is for Dhuhr. For Isha, in general, at all times, it is preferred to pray Isha. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّهُ لَوَقْتُهَا لَوْلَا أَنْ أَشُقَّ عَلَى أُمَّتِي, when he deferred the Isha to the end of 1/3 of the night, at the end of the 1/3 of the night, لِثُلُثِ اللَّيْلِ أَوْ نِصْفِهِ. In one report, the Prophet ﷺ said at the end of the 1/3 of the night, or 1/2. So the preference for Isha is to be deferred until the end of 1/3 of the night. How do you calculate 1/3 of the night? If Maghrib is at 6 a.m., yeah, Maghrib should be at 6 p.m., right? And Fajr is at, let's say, 6 a.m. for ease. Fajr is at 6 a.m., Maghrib at 6 p.m. Then what is the night? 12 hours. What is 1/3 of the night? 10 p.m. That is 4 hours, 1/3. 4 plus 6 from Maghrib, 10 p.m. What is midnight? 12 p.m. And it doesn't always happen this way. So midnight is not always 12 p.m., 12 a.m., but you get it anyway. So then Isha prayer in particular, the Prophet ﷺ recommended that we pray it at the end of the first third or the first half. In one hadith, in one report, أو نصف, or for the first half. But the Prophet used to pray it at the beginning of the time because he feared that deferring it in jama'ah, in congregation, will be a hardship for his ummah. And people were already fallen asleep waiting for the Prophet ﷺ to come out to pray. So he felt that this would be hardship, so he was praying it at the beginning of the time. But if someone will pray Isha at home, and they have the leisure to defer it until the end of the 1/3 of the night, then it is recommended for them still to do that and defer it, because that's the best time for Isha. What is the other time that you do not, or some of us do not pray at the beginning of the time? Fajr would be the only time, the only other time that is preferred to be deferred according to some of us. Maliki, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis pray Fajr at the beginning of the time. Clear? Hanafis pray Fajr closer to the end of the time. Asfiru bil Fajr. فَإِنَّهُ أَعْظَمُ لِلْأَجْرِ or أَعْظَمُ لِأُجُورِكُم. They report a hadith from the Prophet where he said, أَسْفِرُوا بِالْفَجْرِ, as far as brightness. أَسْفِرُوا بِالْفَجْرِ was understood by them to mean pray Fajr when it is bright. فَإِنَّهُ أَعْظَمُ لِأُجُورِكُم, for it is more rewarding to pray Fajr when it is bright. Now, the Maliki, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis say Asfiru bil Fajr did not mean pray Fajr when it is bright, but it meant make sure that Fajr had come, like ensure that the time is in. Ensure that the time is in. Like that light that you see, make sure that you're seeing that light, and that light is the true Fajr and not the false Fajr. Some of it said Asfiru bil Fajr means pray like a long prayer, like a lengthy prayer, where you start the prayer bighalas, when it is dark, and you come out of the prayer when it is bright. So some of them said that it meant lengthen your Fajr prayer. Make your Fajr prayer robust and healthy. Come out of your Fajr prayer when it is bright. Like keep praying Fajr until it becomes bright. That is what it, Asfiru bil-Fajr meant to the Maliki, Shafa'is, and Hanbalis. Because they, Ibn Abd al-Barr reports from, collected reports from the Prophet and Abu Bakr and Uthman and Ali that they used to pray Fajr bi-ghalas. كانوا يصلون الفجر بغلس. They used to pray Fajr when it was dark. So that's just another disagreement concerning the time of Fajr. But generally speaking, the default is that it is best to pray at the beginning of the time.
So that's just an issue of when to pray, but not when the Fajr comes in, because that may, it's an issue with
There is no issue when Fajr comes in.
just when to pray.
The madhahib agree on the commencement of time of Fajr. The disagreement on the commencement of time of Fajr is not a madhabi disagreement. It is an astronomical disagreement, a falaki disagreement, not a madhabi disagreement. We'll come to it now. It looks like we're not going to even finish. Oh. Okay, so we're done with Asr. Okay, Maghrib is easy. ووقت المغرب إلى أن يغيب الشفق الأحمر. And the time of sunset is until the red color of sunset disappears, until the redness in the sky disappears. I actually had a picture of this. I have a picture of both. Anyway, I'm not going to find it now. But at the time of, the beginning of the time of Maghrib is no disagreement. Nobody's disagreeing over the beginning of time of Maghrib. It's clear when the sun sets. The end of the time of al-Maghrib, there is a little bit of madhabi disagreement here, by the way, in the end of the time of al-Maghrib. There is a little bit of madhabi disagreement. But most of the disagreement is astronomical. The beginning of the time of al-Fajr, the disagreement is purely astronomical, not a madhabi disagreement. Okay, so the sun keeps on going down this way. Or, so that no one, chastises me for this, the earth rotates this way. Okay, so the sun keeps on going down this way. And then it reaches here. The Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith that the mazahib agree on, وقت المغرب ما لم يغب الشفق. So the time of Maghrib is until the shafaq, the twilight, disappears. The twilight disappears. Shafaq, twilight, disappears. Now, what is a shafaq? That is when they start to disagree. So the Maliki, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis said the shafaq is the redness. Shafaq is the redness in the sky. Once this redness disappears, the orangey red color in the sky, once this disappears, there will be, across the sky, some whiteness. You call it purple, you call it white, it is a shafaq al-abyad, it is the white twilight. So there is across the horizon, there is this light, or there is this lighter color than the rest of the sky. You agree? Okay. The Hanafis wait for that whiteness to disappear. Maliki, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis wait only for the redness. After the sun sets, don't you see like redness? in the sky, across the horizon, the Maliki, Shafi'is, and Hanbalis are waiting for that redness to disappear. They don't really care about the whiteness that comes after the redness. They don't wait for that to disappear. The Hanafis wait for that to disappear. Therefore, there's a little bit of madhabi disagreement. Most of the Hanafis, they follow the Jumhur in this time because most of the calendars, particularly in North America, where convenience becomes the arbitrator of all of these issues, people are even thinking of not waiting for the redness to disappear. Just get it over with. But why do we have disagreements beyond this madhabi disagreement when it comes to the beginning of the time of Isha? Because this angle, because we depend on the iPhone, we depend on calculations. And these calculations will have basically to figure out at which angle. Do you see this angle? You see, this is the sun at the time of sunset. And then the sun kept on moving. At which angle between this horizon and where the sun is now, at which angle does the time of Isha begin? And there are multitudes of research out there. Sometimes it is the fuqaha and sometimes it's the astronomers. But in all honesty, the fuqaha should take a step back and let the astronomers figure this out. It is not your business. Your business is basically to tell the astronomers, this is what it is, this is what we want you to figure out, but figuring out the angle itself, that's not the business of the jurists. And to basically stick their nose into this is inappropriate, unacceptable. Just take a step back and let the astronomers figure this out. Tell them, we're looking for the red twilight to disappear. Figure out for us when does the red twilight disappear, the proper angle. The problem is, this is not only dependent on the angle, this is also dependent on your altitude, this is also dependent on the conditions of the sky. So basically, to say to all people all over the world, the angle is 12.5, which is the smallest they ever talked about, or 19, which is the widest they ever talked about. So to tell them it's 12.5, it's 14, it's 14.5, it's 15. The angle in Canada is different from the angle in America. The angle in New Jersey is different from the angle in Texas. So what do we do here? We just figure out a reasonable angle, and try to factor in, the difference in altitude and so on and so forth as much as we can. We will unfortunately have to disregard the conditions of the sky and some other factors and figure out a reasonable angle and just go by it and agree on it, and then you go by this. Because sometimes you come to the point where you say, لا يسع الناس غير ذلك. Nothing will suit the people other than this. Anything else will be a hardship, undue hardship. So that's the idea. That is why we disagree. And that's why you have the ISNA, and you have the al-Qura, and you have the Muslim League, and you have the Egyptian whatever, this or that. You have all of these calendars, and what they disagree over is what angle should we use to calculate the time of Isha. Okay, so now we're done with the time of Isha. We're done with the beginning of the time of Isha. Isha starts when the twilight disappears. What is the twilight? Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali, the red twilight. Hanafi, the white twilight. I'll come to it. And then that's when the Isha begins. When does the Isha end? The Isha ends for the Hanbalis at midnight. This is midnight. Midnight is opposite to Dhuhr. Okay, so this is midnight. This is midday. This is midnight. Midnight is when the time of Isha comes out for the Hanbalis. Up until Fajr, they call this waqt al-darura. This is the time of necessity. This is if you have an excuse to defer Isha past midnight, you're forgiven if you have a compelling excuse. But this is a peculiar Hanbali position. The other madhahib said that the time of Isha goes all the way up to the time of Fajr. Where did the disagreement come from? The disagreement comes from two hadith. One hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said, وَوَقْتُ الْعِشَاءِ إِلَى مُنْتَصَفِ اللَّيْلِ, and the time of Isha is up until midnight, is up to midnight. So the clear hadith, right? Authentic, like it could, as much as authenticity could be. And then the Prophet also said, ليس في النوم تفريق إنما التفريق في من ترك إنما التفريط من ترك الصلاة حتى يدخل وقت الصلاة الأخرى. There is no negligence in sleeping. The negligence is when you do not pray until the time of the next prayer comes in. Until the time of the next prayer comes in. The Jumhur, that's Hanafis, Malikis, and Shafi'is, Hanafis, Malikis, and Shafi'is, went by this hadith. There is no negligence in sleeping. The negligence is when you don't pray until the time of the next prayer comes in. The Hanbalis tell them that this hadith had been already specified because the Fajr, the time of Fajr, goes out by consensus at Ishraq, at sunrise, not Dhuhr, not the time of the next prayer. So this hadith has been specified. So since this hadith has been specified, that generality or al-umum yaduf, that generality becomes weaker. And then we will go by the other hadith of the Prophet ﷺ where he said, waqtul Isha ila muntasif al-layl, the time of Isha is up to midnight. The Jumhur, they go back and rebuttal this by saying that this hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ said the time of the prayer is up until the time of the next prayer, or which it means that the time of the prayer goes out when the next prayer comes in. By consensus, we exclude Fajr. We agree, we exclude Fajr by consensus. But then the generality remains of this hadith applicable to Isha, applicable to all other times except what has been excluded by consensus. Then we have this other hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that the time of Isha is up to midnight, and you Hanbalis want to use one hadith or give sort of more authority to one hadith, which is the time of Isha is up to midnight. We want to reconcile between them. And we find that the better way to reconcile between those two hadith is to say that the time of Isha is up to midnight means the time of preference, and it goes all the way up to Fajr as the time of permissibility. The time of permissibility goes all the way up to Fajr, but the time of preference comes out at midnight. You see, everybody has their own point. But anyway, so by agreement, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali, by agreement, they all tell you pray Isha before midnight, right? They all recommended that for you. The difference is if you don't pray it, if you don't have a legitimate excuse and fail to pray it, and it is past midnight, the Hanbalis will consider you to be a sinner. Hanafis, Malikis, and Shafi'is will consider you to have missed the preferred time, but they do not consider it a sin. Then the sun keeps on, this is the sun here, keeps on moving, or the earth keeps on rotating. So the sun is moving, until this time here, when you start to see the light of the sun, not the sun itself, that will light reappears. That will light that was present after the sun went down, we were still seeing the light of the sun, that will light. Here, it is the opposite phenomenon. We are seeing the light of the sun before it comes up, before the sun comes up. So this is when the sun rises. This is sunrise here. The sun came up, you are actually seeing the sun itself. But from this point, you are, if you're here, you're seeing at the horizon the light of the sun that is about to come. And that is when the time of Fajr comes in. There is no madhabi disagreement in Fajr, but there is astronomical disagreement. This angle, just like this angle here, calculating this angle makes us disagree, and you have the different calendars, and every calendar has a different time for Fajr. Go by the calendar that your masjid uses. Consider this to be your calendar, go by it, and don't ask any questions. Just go by it. Because really it is beyond you. To figure these things out is beyond you. You want to be cautious, that's fine. Don't require of the people to be cautious and to leave like a margin of safety or here or there. Just be, if you want to be cautious, it's fine for you. But if you go by the calendar of your masjid, you should be fine. Okay, well, it looks like we're out of time, so okay. Quickly, we'll just finish this so that we at least finish the condition of the time. It will take just 5 minutes. He said, وَوَقْتُ الْفَجْرِ مِنْ ذَلِكَ إِلَى طُلُوعِ الشَّمْسِ. Then the time of Fajr is from that point, when you start to see the twilight, until the rising of the second dawn. They talk here about 2 Fajrs. When the sun reaches here, you may start to see a little bit of a light effect here. This light effect will not be across the horizon like this. Will not be across the horizon like this. It may be like this. That's why the Prophet called it Dhanabu Sirhan. It's the tail of the wolf. It is not all the way. The Fajr is when you see the light all across the horizon. The light is horizontal, not vertical. Not vertical. If you see some light coming out like this before Fajr, that is vertical, this is the Dhanabu Sirhan, or the tail of the wolf. This is al-Fajr al-Kadhib, this is the untrue Fajr. You wait until the light is all across the horizon, and that's when the time of Fajr comes in. It goes out by agreement when the sun rises. Goes out by agreement when the sun rises. He says, وَمَنْ كَبَّرَ لِلصَّلَاةِ قَبْلَ خُرُوجِ وَقْتِهَا فَقَدْ أَدْرَكَهَا وَمَنْ كَبَّرَ لِلصَّلَاةِ قَبْلَ خُرُوجِ وَقْتِهَا فَقَدْ أَدْرَكَهَا. He who makes takbir, saying the opening Allahu Akbar, for the prayer before its time ends, will have caught it. So, once you say Allahu Akbar, you're in the Salah. And if you say Allahu Akbar before the time comes in, you would have caught the Salah. The one exception the Hanbalis have about this, is Jum'ah. They require you to catch the ruku' in Jum'ah to have caught the Jum'ah. So they require you to actually catch 1 rak'ah, not just to say Allahu Akbar. But generally speaking, the Hanbalis will tell you, you catch the reward of the Jama'ah if you say Allahu Akbar before the Imam says Assalamu alaikum. You catch the time of the prayer if you say Allahu Akbar before the time goes out. You catch the prayer with the muqim if you are traveling, and then you say Allahu Akbar behind the muqim. behind someone who's resident, then you should pray like a resident if you said Allahu Akbar before he said Assalamu alaikum. So if you say Allahu Akbar, you catch the reward, you catch the salah, but the only thing that you don't catch, and that is the position of the vast majority of scholars as well, is that for Jum'ah, you did not catch the Jum'ah if you did not catch one rak'ah. How would you catch one rak'ah in the Hanbali mazhab? By catching the ruku'ah. So if you came later than the ruku'ah of the second rak'ah in al-Jum'ah in the Hanbali mazhab, you prayed Dhuhr. It's not Jum'ah.
So do you pray fourth?
Yes. Then he said, والصلاة في أول الوقت أفضل إلا في العشاء الآخرة وفي شدة حر الظهر. Oh, alhamdulillah, we finished this. Praying at the beginning of the time is better, except for the last night prayer, al-Isha al-Akhirah, which means the last night prayer. First night prayer is Maghrib, because Maghrib you pray it at night. Last night prayer is Isha. And Dhuhr when it is excessively hot. Just forgot to mention that Maghrib goes out for the Malikis and Shafi'is right after Adhan al-Maghrib. The time for Maghrib goes out for the Malikis and Shafi'is a few minutes after Adhan al-Maghrib. So for the Shafi'is allow you to pray 2 rak'ahs and then you get right into Maghrib. The Malikis do not even allow you to pray the 2 rak'ahs. Maghrib time for them is, minutes. Adhan al-Maghrib is there and you must pray right away. Hanafis and Hanbalis, they would still recommend for you to pray Maghrib early because Hadith Rafi' ibn Khadij and others, where they said that we used to walk away from the Maghrib prayer with the Prophet ﷺ and we would still be able to see where our arrows fall, where the arrows fall. So if you shoot an arrow, you would still be able to see your arrow falling. It means by agreement, Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, Hanbali. You want to pray Maghrib as early as you can. So like you make adhan, you pray 2 rak'ahs according to the Shafi'is, and then you pray the Maghrib and that's it. This is the preferred time for al-Maghrib. Hanafis and Hanbalis still say that it is permissible to defer Maghrib all the way up until Isha. Malikis and Shafi'is say it is impermissible. For them, the time of Maghrib is limited to that time of the prayer. Shafi'is would allow the Sunnah, Malikis would not even allow you to do that. قل قولي هذا أستغفر الله لكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك